Video. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we actually have a really interesting session that's being hosted by the AccLab. And what we're looking at is how to use behavioral insights to boost social impact. I know a lot of colleagues have been hearing for the last year or so this new area called Behavioral Insights. What does it mean? Why should we use it? Why should we care? This is that platform. And this is an opportunity for all of us to learn what it is and also to see how we can use it in our work. And so, I would really encourage everyone to take this as a learning opportunity and feel free to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. All questions are relevant. So towards the end of the presentation, we'll do a Q&A and try and see if this is something you can bring in. We will explain more later, but AccLab and Dr. Umar Taj, we will be facilitating more support to help projects mainstream this work better. So this is not just a one-off learning session. This is actually a session which is kickstarting a proper country support platform. Insights. Yeah, so this will be an ongoing support. I'll give you more details at the end. In fact, stay tuned till the end for more. But in the meanwhile, it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Umar Taj, who has been working across different projects, especially with the youth team, using behavioral insights, helping us mainstream it, and also to give you a little bit more of case studies and experiences from the field. We actually have called in our own colleagues who have used behavioral insights. So we have Umar Malik, who at DPU has used behavioral insights for a prototype on water conservation. Dr. Umar Taj, on behalf of the DHL team, will also provide, will also present briefly what they're doing on behavioral insights and how they're using it. And then Hamza, together with Umar, will present how the Youth Empowerment Program have been using behavioral insights. So you'll have an opportunity to see how we are using this, and you can also reach out to other colleagues who've been working on this for more information. So with this, I'm handing over to Umar Taj to take the session away. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Beenish. Welcome, everyone. And I'll very quickly jump into what I would like to call a rapid BI masterclass. So BI is a short form for Behavioral Insights, and just for the sake of convenience, we'll just use the term BI throughout this session. So what I want to quickly do with all of you is to very quickly explain the two different approaches that are there when you're trying to solve within your units. I mean, almost all of the problems are fairly complex. So this is really important for us to understand, well, what are two different ways in which you approach solving a complex problem. I then want to very quickly introduce you to two words. And I really hope if there's one thing that you take out of today's session is just adding these two words to your vocabulary. We haven't been creative in giving names. It's system 1, system 2, and I will very quickly explain what this is. This is something to do with the way our brains are wired. I will share with you 3 behavioral insights that I think you should definitely know, and there are many, many more, but just because we don't have enough time, I'll just share 3 to try and get your attention, and hopefully future conversations that we have, I'll keep on sharing more with you. So to kick off, I'm going to start with asking you a question, which is, do you know your own decision mindware? And this is an exercise that I do every time when I start a session, and I'll do here as well. So I'm going to very quickly show you an image on the screen, and I want you guys to I want all of you to try and see what thought comes up in your mind when I ask you the question, what is this lady like? Okay, I'll very quickly just show you. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. Cool. Okay, and I'll do it one last time. Yes. Okay. When I show this image to people and I ask them, what is she like? Quite often I get responses, well, she seems like she's serving something, maybe she's upside down. And then I ask people, well, what's she like? What do you think about her emotions? And this is something that might pop in a lot of views. Look like, yeah, she seems like she's smiling, right? And here's an interesting thing. If I just flip this around, that's the actual image. And this is quite a fun example that you start with, but it highlights quite an important way in which our brains are wired, which is there's something that instantly happens in our mind. We form an impression, there's a judgment that we form, and we trust that judgment. We don't really doubt that, is that right or wrong? And that's quite an important theme which goes in behavioral science, which is how much of our intuition, judgment, what happens very quickly in our mind, and then what happens when we try and these two different concepts. And one big point here is that we have a really good understanding of how our bodies work, but we don't have a very good understanding of how our brains work. And it's not only us, because we don't know as well how our brains are wired, how that functions, we therefore don't have very good understanding of how the brains of all the people who we are trying to target, how they function, right? And that's something which behavioral science has gone into a lot, which is trying to understand, well, what is the way that our brain works? And before I get into that wiring part, I want to really put focus on what are the two different approaches that we typically adopt when we're trying to solve a complex problem. The first is what I like to call a standard approach. What's the standard approach? The standard approach is that whenever we see a complex problem, we believe that that complex problem exists either because people don't have an awareness about what to do, or they don't have the skills to address the problem, or very simply, they just don't want to change. And I'm very sure that you will be able to relate it. Take any complex problem, any challenge that you're trying to address right now, or the public sector is trying to address right now. And you would find that this is the underlying assumption, right? That, well, if people aren't following SOPs for COVID, it's because they don't know about it. So how about if we just tell them, or they don't have the skills for a certain different challenge. So how about we give them training, or that's it. It's a motivation issue. They don't want to change. So that's the standard approach. And if that is the assumption in the standard approach, then what are the typical solutions? One, in standard approach, we believe that any behavior that we see decision of that person. So, for instance, if we see somebody throwing rubbish on the road, that was an active decision. If we see somebody not wearing a mask, we believe that that was an active decision of the person. That's the philosophy that we have when we're trying within the standard approach. Second, we compute intention from action. This is linked to the first one. If we see someone doing something, or if we don't see someone doing something, we believe that that's because it's about will. They just don't want to do that, or they just want to do that. That's it, right? And if we go with this kind of an approach, then what are our typical solutions? Typical solutions are, let's raise awareness because we think that people don't know, right? So hygiene issues, well, there are hygiene issues because people just don't know how important hygiene is. So how about if we just do mass public awareness campaigns in which we tell them, and all of a sudden magically it's going to get solved? Or if there's an issue of will, which is motivation, then what do you typically do? Let's offer an incentive, or let's threaten with sanctions. Let's put fines on, right? So, and whenever it comes to compliance related challenges in the public sector, you would see these three solutions quite often. Even, to be honest, within UN agencies, a lot of the programming, a lot of the projects that we do are simply around these three kind of solutions. So this is standard approach. Okay? Let me give you a couple of examples. This is a campaign that was run in the UK. It has still been running for many, many, many years, which is called 5-a-day campaign. The idea is to get people to eat more healthy. If you want people to eat more healthy, the philosophy and the standard approach was, let's just tell them you should eat healthy, and there you go. They will eat healthy. I'll tell you what, this has not worked. Millions and millions of pounds have been wasted on mass public awareness campaigns. There is really just no result, right? Why? Because we didn't really understand what was the underlying mechanisms of behavior change. Here's a second example. This is a more fun one. A colleague of mine went to Mexico, and this is a poster that is at the back of the door in the toilet. 77 ways to deal with stress. Now, mental health is quite a big challenge in all countries, more so in developing countries. Do you think putting a poster up telling people 77 ways to deal with stress is ever going to solve mental health problem? Not at all, right? This wouldn't. Again, the underlying assumption is if you only tell people how to deal with stress, that's it. They're going to do it. But that just simply doesn't happen, right? That just doesn't happen. Well, what's an alternative approach? The alternative approach is what we call a people-centered approach. This is where design thinking comes in. This is where behavioral science comes in, right? And within people-centered approach, what we do say is that a complex problem is there because of uncertain economic, environmental, and psychological causes. And if that's the case, then we say that we really want to explore first what people really need, want, and desire. We want to understand why they behave the way they do. And then we want to use the design of products, services, and places to support people in making better decisions. And later, we're going to share 3 cases to give you a little bit of a flavor of by using a people-centered approach. Right? Well, let me share a couple of examples to illustrate this point. In this image is actually a solution to a problem. And typically, again, I ask people to shout out what they think. Just because of shortage of time, I'll just explain what was the problem and what was the solution. The problem was that there's a company that manufactures bicycles. And then people would order this online, and these bicycles would be stuffed in this box and would be sent to people's homes. Now, what would happen is, most of the times, 1 or 2 of the bicycle parts would be broken by the time they reach the customer. Why? Because the courier people didn't handle the box with care. So under standard approach, what were the typical interventions that they tried? Well, they put a big sign saying handle with care. They tried to incentivize the couriers. They tried to find the couriers. None of that worked. Right? But what did work? They just printed picture of a smart screen on the box. That's it. Inside this box is a bicycle. But the couriers don't know that, right? And if you are a courier, if you are handling this box, and if you think that there's a smart TV inside, you just automatically handle this with care. Now, this is an example of what we call a people-centered approach, right? Where you try to understand, well, how does our mind work? And then how can I leverage that in designing an intervention that will help me achieve my desired outcome? Here is another example. This is a fun one, but a really important one. So in many countries, energy bills are very high. And here's a fun one to try and keep the heating levels down. And this is for kids, right? So parents doing this, where they're saying, if you keep the heating down, you're going to get more presents. If you keep the heating up, you're going to get less presents, right? Now, this is a fun example, but again, it illustrates a really, really important point, which is, if we want people to do something, we have to translate the information into what they would care about. Kids care about presents. Parents are caring about the energy bill. And that translation needs to happen. And quite often we fail to do this. We want people to do something, but we position it in how we want it, and we don't translate it into what it would mean for them. Like, why would they want to do that particular thing? The last example in this people-centered approach was one of the very early examples of, of explaining what is a good a success story for using behavioral insights. So this is a road, right? And actually this particular one is in Chicago. On the right hand corner over here, there's a bend, and the problem is that in this bend, when cars would come, people would be traveling with quite a high speed, and they don't slow down enough in this corner. And because they don't slow down enough, it would cause a lot of accidents. So the standard approach, they tried that, which was, let's put a billboard up saying reduce speed. Let's tell them, there are a lot more accidents happen in this corner, so please be careful. Right? Let's tell them, let's find them, etc. None of those worked. What worked was these lines. And if you notice the distance between these lines and what happens to it as you approach the corner, the distance between the two lines has reduced. And here's what happens. Imagine you are driving at 70 and these lines are passing from under you. Now you're still driving at 70, but as you approach closer to this corner, these lines are disappearing faster because the distance is short here. And because these lines are disappearing faster underneath you, you think that you are speeding up. And because you think that you are speeding up, the knee-jerk reaction is to brake. Okay. Just this very simple intervention of painting lines this way, it reduced the number of accidents by 36%. Very, very low cost intervention, but very big impact. Right? This is what we mean by using behavioral insights to boost impact. Most of the examples of using behavioral insights are very cheap interventions, right? And they're just slight tweaks. As I said, the word boost, they're just boosting something that you're already doing. I do realize that I am sort of rushing a bit, but I want to cover this stuff, and then there will be opportunity for question and answers later. And after this session, there will be lots of opportunity for us to have separate conversations as well. So now we come to the two words that I want you to add in your vocabulary, system 1 and system 2. And here is a good example to illustrate this. Have a look at this. When I show this image, and it's not only me, a lot of us behavioral scientists, when we show this image to people, the first thing, and I want you to reflect what came in your mind, is a lot of us, as soon as we see the picture, we think that this man is angry. Right? And that's quite interesting because I only asked you, or I only asked the audience to have a look at this. That's it. I didn't ask to judge the emotion. But that's something which automatically happens in our brain. And that's what we call fast thinking. That judgment or assessment of the mood of the person is it just happened, and that's called fast thinking, and that is what we call system 1 thinking, the system 1 part of our brain, which is always active, and it is just automatically generating a lot of assessments and judgments. And if we show people something like this, there isn't really an answer that comes to your mind. What you do realize is that, well, it's a multiplication problem, and like, I should be able to solve it, but just something like that. It's not that a very, something automatically pops up. That doesn't happen. And that's something which is an instance of what we call slow thinking. And this fast thinking and slow thinking that is happening in our brain. But this is not balanced. Almost 95% of our decision making is taking place in this subconscious fast thinking. And it's only 5% which is more slow, more analytic thinking, right? And here's the thing. System 1, which is the fast thinking system, that 95% of the time our brain is on this is operating automatically. We do not have a sense of control over this. It will just keep on happening. Whereas system 2, which is the more rational part of our thinking, that's only 5% of the time. And that's where you're trying to allocate, more attention to the effortful mental act. If you have a big decision to make, you are using system 2, but most of the time we are just using system 1. This is very, very important for us to understand more about this. And I will just share a resource where we can understand more about this. Why? Because quite often we are designing for system 2 of the people, which is more rational. You should do this because of this, giving arguments to change behavior. All of us are almost always operating in system 1, which is this fast thinking. So there's a mismatch in the design of our projects, our programs, our intervention, and the way people's brain are working all the time. Okay? And that's really important for us to understand. Now, one of the things is that this system 2, which is the more analytical, more rational part of our brain, right? This is the system that should be monitoring and controlling what we do, our thoughts, our actions. But the problem is that this system 2 is very lazy. It applies what we call the law of least effort, right? And that's where a lot of what we call cognitive biases prop up. Okay, I know I'm introducing quite a few terms. As I said, this hopefully is not going to be the only time, and we will have more opportunities to talk through. But just to illustrate this point of fast thinking, slow thinking, and this lazy controller, I asked this question to the national sample of Pakistan, around 1,800 odd people, nationally representative sample. And it was a very simple question. A bat and a ball cost 110 rupees. The bat costs 100 rupees more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I asked this question to people. And for many of you, an answer would pop up, which is 10 rupees. Right? Bat and ball together, they cost 110. Bat costs 100 more than the ball, so the ball should be 10, right? That answer is actually wrong. Okay. Now, 10 that props up automatically in your head is system 1 fast thinking. In fact, 95% of Pakistanis got this wrong in the national survey. They said 10, right? Which illustrates, so it's system 2 should have gotten active and asked the system 1 that, hold on, don't say 10, just think, just reflect, pay more attention. But that didn't happen. System 2 is lazy, right? And the system 1 just said 10 because that sort of made sense in our head, right? The actual answer is 5 if you're wondering. If you're interested in more of this is a book that I would strongly recommend, Thinking Fast, who is regarded as the father of the whole behavioral science field. By the way, he's the only psychologist to have won a Nobel Prize in economics, right? So it's a really, really important book. I would strongly recommend all of you to do that. So to conclude this bit is, so the measure of success for system 1 is the coherence of the story that it manages to create. The more believable a story, the more the person is likely to accept that narrative and just behave according to that, ignoring the quality and quantity of data. This quality and quantity of data is what system 2 should be doing. But as I said before, system 2 isn't active, right? So we need to be very careful when we are designing interventions that they should be targeting for system 1, right? Now moving on to 3 behavioral insights that you should know. And as I said before, there are many, many more. Okay. The first one, and we run a lot of experiments to understand exactly what influences people's behavior. So here's the first one. All of you would probably recognize this building in Lahore. It's called Minar-e-Pakistan. Now to a national sample again of Pakistan, I split them into 2 groups. To one group, which was around 800-900 people, I asked them, do you think that the height of Minar-e-Pakistan is above or below 1 meter? I first asked this question. Most of the people said, yeah, well, it's above 1 meter. Almost everybody said it's above 1 meter. And then I asked them, well, what do you think is the height of Minar-e-Pakistan? Okay. And I just recorded that answer. That's it. Job done for group A. To group B, I asked them, do you think that the height of Minar-e-Pakistan is above or below 1,000 meter? Everybody said, well, it's below 1,000 meter. And I asked them the same question to this group, which is, what do you think is the height of Minar-e-Pakistan? And I was interested in the difference of what people here said would be the height of Minar-e-Pakistan on what people in this group said. Right? At the end of the day, I'm asking the same question. The first question in both groups is irrelevant, right? This is the real question, which is what is the height of Minar-e-Pakistan? And when I calculated averages, there was a difference of around 350 meters in the average answer of both groups. Such a huge difference being created just by me asking either 1 meter or 1,000 meter. And what is this concept? This concept is called anchoring, right? Anchoring is us getting influenced by an irrelevant factor. And even if we know that we are getting influenced by that irrelevant factor, we don't adjust enough. Why is it important? For all of you, you might get anchored to certain ideas, certain statistics. If you are getting anchored to certain ideas, it's very hard then to get away from it. You might get anchored by past projects. You might get anchored by something that has worked in some other country and so on. Similarly, the target audience for whom you are trying to influence, they might be getting anchored on certain messages, on certain narratives, right? So this is one behavioral insight which I think is quite important for all of us to know about. Let's move on to the second one, right? The second one is, again, I do this exercise with people. I will just explain this exercise, right? So I tell people that I have chosen a certain rule. It's a mathematical rule. And based on that rule, I generate 3 numbers, okay? And I ask everybody that their job is to guess what is that mathematical rule that I am using to generate the 3 numbers. And here's what I do. I show 3 numbers, 10, 20, 40, and I tell them, well, this is a sequence that obeys the mathematical rule that I am using to generate, okay? And then, I ask people that now, because your job is to guess what is the mathematical rule that I'm using. So what I will do is you shout out a sequence and I will tell you whether the sequence that you are saying obeys my rule or not. All right. And then I open the floor. Okay. Actually, this would be a nice thing. Can you just put in the chat, shout out a sequence, and I will tell you whether it obeys my rule or not. Your job is to guess my rule, okay? So just, I am looking at the chat. So just put it in the chat box. Just say a sequence, and I'll tell you whether it obeys my rule or not. Yep. So 5, 10, 20 obeys my rule. 2, 4, 8 obeys my rule. Okay. Someone else? Just one more. Yeah. Okay. So there's a private one. Yeah. Okay. So interesting one, right? 2, 6, 8 obeys my rule. Now here's what happens. When you look at most of the time, people already think that my rule is that I am doubling numbers. And so they only ask me a sequence in which the numbers are getting doubled when you start off, right? And if I let it long enough, then they realize what's happening. And here's the very interesting, this happened in New York Times, by the way. I think around 70,000 people participated. And most of them, they just said a rule in which the numbers were getting doubled. And when they were asked to predict what do they think the rule is, they said it's doubling, whereas that's wrong. Just for all of you, my rule is any series of increasing numbers. So Saima put 268. 268 also obeys my rule because it's any series of increasing numbers. But the very interesting point is, when you think that I am doubling, you only seek confirmation of that. So people only suggest another sequence in which numbers are getting doubled. They don't try and disconfirm their belief. And this is something which we call confirmation bias. It's our tendency to search for or to interpret or to favor or to recall information, only that one which confirms our pre-existing beliefs or hypothesis. And we discount information that doesn't do that. right? This is so important when we are thinking what should be the intervention. This is so important when our target audience, who we want to influence, to understand what are their pre-existing beliefs and whether they will behave only in the way that confirms their belief or not, right? So confirmation bias is a very, very powerful thing which affects both us who are trying to design projects and interventions, and even the audience for whom we are trying to deliver these projects for. I'll move to the last one very quickly, and here I will explain this experiment. It was around tapping a song. So you split people into two groups, and one group was what we called a tapper, and the other group is what becomes the audience. And the job was that you would ask the tapper that they had to go on stage, and through their feet, they had to tap a song. And the job of the audience was to guess that song. Okay, that's the experiment. Very simple. Tappers have to go on stage, have to tap a song, audience have to figure out what is the song. But just before the tapper goes to stage, there's a researcher who asks them, well, just hold on, before you go to stage, what proportion of the audience do you think will be able to guess your song? Okay. And then what they did was they actually recorded what proportion of the audience actually was able to guess the song. Okay. So here was their hypothesis, and here from the audience we were actually able to know the results. So very quickly, just put it in the chat. What percentage do you think the tappers on average said? What did they think that what percentage of the audience would be able to guess their song? Just put it in the chat box. Yeah, so let me just phrase that again. For the tappers, what percentage did they think that the audience would guess their song? Just put a number in the chat box. 100%. Okay. Yeah. So 50%. Exactly. Right. So here's what was 49%. So the tappers on average said, we think that almost half of the audience will be able to guess our song. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Naeem. Thanks, Mozam. Thanks, Azhar. Thanks, Zulfikar. Now make a guess. What portion of the audience actually was able to guess the song? Just put it in the chat box. So Mozam says 30%, 30%. Aha. Only 3% of the audience was actually able to guess the song. Okay. And this is a really, really important point, which is what we call the curse of knowledge. Because the tappers, they already had the song in their head. Now they weren't going to sing the song. They only had to tap their feet. But in their mind, they knew the song already. So it was very hard for them to imagine what it would be like for the audience who don't know anything about the song to guess, right? And there's a mismatch, and that's why it's called curse of knowledge. It's a cognitive bias when all of us who are designing, who know a lot about one problem, who have been working on the problem, right? You all have been working on different challenges for so many years now, but we unknowingly assume that people who we are trying to create interventions for, that they have all the same amount of background that we have. Okay? And that's again really important for us to keep an eye on. Right? And where does this show? This shows in when we are designing communication. A lot of times the way we design communication is so hard for someone who doesn't know anything about it to understand, but it makes absolute sense for us because we already have background knowledge about it, right? So curse of knowledge was the third one. So these are the three for me. Very quickly, I'm always asked this question about, well, to summarize behavior change. So I've tried to put it in an equation form. So behavior is a function of the person, himself or herself, and the environment that is around that person. Now, about the person, there are two things. Yes, motivation, very important. do they have the will? Are they motivated to do that behavior that we are asking them to do? And second is ability. Do they know how to do that particular thing? So this is important. But then what we miss quite often is environment, which comes, what are people around them doing? And does the physical environment around them enable that particular behavior? So this for me is just in one equation, what how what influences behavior: person, environment, and it's these four things, right? So for me, just very quickly, the three quick takeaways are: one, we should try and design for the system one of our audience. Second, giving information and training is good, but it's not enough. Okay. And then the environment and the social influence, it plays a much more important role than we think. Okay, that's another really, we focus a lot on motivation and ability, but not enough on the environment and the social influence, right? So we should try and focus more on that. Okay. Last bit from me, where does BI fit in our work? And for me, within our work in the country office, there are three things where BI can fit. One is programming itself. So the projects, the interventions, we can try and embed behavioral insights to boost the effectiveness of what we are already doing. That's one. Second, in M&E. So we can try and think about using more innovative methods that are already there in behavioral science to measure impact. And we will show one case study. Hamza will share one case study around that. And the third is around comms. In all our projects, we are always doing, there's always comms work. So we can try and embed, and this is very cheap and very quick to do, right? To try and boost the effectiveness of all of our communication materials. Okay. By just thinking, how can we embed BI? And Beenish will explain at the end, a call to action that we have to help you with any of these three things, right? So now I'm going to move pass over to Hamza, who can share the case of the youth empowerment program.
Thank you very much, Omar. If somebody could please put up the presentation that I shared yesterday.
So Hamza, I have the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
You just tell me next and I'll do it. Yeah.
So, okay. So we applied behavioral insights to measure the impact of our work with young prisoners in 3 jails of Karachi. The project involved provision of market-informed livelihood skills to 150 youth between the ages of 15 and 29 years. These were complemented with the psychological counseling sessions to reduce prisoner anxiety and aggression and enhance their self-esteem. The overall theory of change of the project was that if young people in prisons are provided with opportunities for economic empowerment and constructive social engagement, then their vulnerability to involvement in violence and conflict would decrease.
Brilliant. Thanks. So Hamza, are you happy for me to just quickly explain the results then?
No. I'm just giving an overview of the second slide, if you could go there. So what was the challenge in this case? In addition to the sensitivities involved in working with young people in conflict with the law, the two main challenges that confronted us while working with these prisoners was to understand the extent of their vulnerability to involvement in violence and conflict. This was especially challenging as the prisoners we worked with were involved in petty crimes. While we wanted to work with people who were directly involved in violent extremism, as a development organization supported by a CSO, we were not given access to them. So we were given access to prisoners who were involved in petty crimes. Our review of secondary literature had revealed that there's a significant overlap between criminality and violent extremism. And we wanted to see reach out to the deep structure of these young prisoners' vulnerability to involvement in violence and conflict through behavioral insights. And this was assessed through measuring their social connectedness with their families, with their friends, and with their community gatekeepers. Secondly, we wanted a very effective tool to measure the impact of our project in terms of reducing their vulnerability. Experience had taught us that the use of traditional pre and post training assessment tools often leads to overwhelmingly positive results, as prisoners are often trained in the presence of police and they are unlikely to give a negative response in this situation. Secondly, to show that they are completely reformed, any direct questions about the positive or negative effect of the trainings is likely to yield a very positive result, which will not reflect the situation on ground. So we wanted to use an innovative methodology that could sort of, avoid these limitations of conventional tools and help us understand the impact of the project in terms of reducing young prisoners' vulnerability to involvement in violence, conflict, and crime. Now, Umar, if you could please give an overview of the tool we use, the oneness tool, and the results from its application. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And this is a really interesting work, right? And because it's quite a sensitive one, and it's really hard to measure impact in this. So Hamza already shared the theory of change and the constraints, and our hypothesis was that if we do an intervention, which was counseling, and then there was also skills training, then it would lead to more social connectedness. It would lead to more self-control, so people would be more patient, and then it would also lead to more cooperation. Right? They would be more trusting of other people if we do. This was our hypothesis. We used a tool to measure social connectedness, to measure social cohesion. It is called oneness. Right? And very quickly, what it does is you show people circles that are overlapping and you ask them which one of them represent how connected you feel to whatever that the person is. Just very quickly, that's sort of what it looks like, right? So people could choose, if this is you and if this is, let's say, your father, so you could ask, well, which of these circles represent how connected you feel? So the more overlap, it means more connected. Very simple visual tool, could be used for people who have zero literacy rate stuff, right? What were the results, right? So we asked this for a lot of different groups: mother, father, close sibling, local neighborhood, barrack fellows, someone speaking a different language, someone with different faith, Pakistani nation as a whole, etc. And then we already had a hypothesis that as a result of our training and counseling, we think that connectedness with mother would increase, with father would increase, etc. And then we saw what happened. We did a pre and a post, and we made a difference, and we saw whether these results were significant or not. And we already mapped out each of this connectedness with them, which factor of the theory of change would this link to? And what we saw has been really interesting results. So people were already felt very connected to the mother, so we didn't see any difference there. But then with father, the connectedness increased, with close sibling it increased, and then look at some of these ones with friend outside family. So how connected they feel to their friends outside family, there was a jump of 40% as a result of the training and counseling. If you look at how connected they felt to someone speaking a different language, so this is something very important in the domain of social cohesion, there's a jump of 58% in how connected they felt. How connected they felt with someone from a different faith or religion, again a 30% jump in this. Right? So the last ones were where we created scenarios to see, and a hypothesis was that it would decrease. We'll be writing a blog of this, so we'll share this with you. But this is just to show how we can use a different way to try and measure the impact of our intervention on social connectedness, which then relates to social cohesion, which is part of our big theory of change for this very project. I'm going to jump to sharing our next example. I'm just presenting this on behalf of the DHL colleagues who weren't able to make this. The problem, the challenge here is how can we increase the number and quality of grievances that are reported to the gender desk in Multan? What are the challenges that were identified? One, people don't know about the gender desk or the services they provide. They don't know how or when should they be reporting a grievance. There's a lack of trust in government tax services. There's a misperception that just the matter of reporting, there's a lot of hassle, and we might not get as good a benefit out of it. There's a social stigma and sense of shame about reporting a grievance, and quite simply, people just forget, to report to the gender desk, right? So this is an experiment that we are currently planning to run. There are two interventions. One intervention will be this card that will be designed. It's a commitment contract. So this will be given to women, asking, and there will be calendars shown, and they will be asked to mark when do they think they might visit the gender desk, and just asking women to mark acts as a commitment, right? It's a public commitment that somehow they have made to visit the gender desk, right? And the second intervention, along with this card, commitment card, was going to be a reminder which is going to be sent to women, asking them to tick, like, which of these different services do they think that they might use the gender desk for, right? Maybe getting access to necessarily health services, something. And they will be asked just to tick this, and then they will be reminded about it. So these are the two interventions which will be run by the THL colleagues. It's going to be with 100 women, and there's going to be randomization. So again, sample size is fairly small, but these are pilots, right? So the idea is, from here, if we learn, if something like this works, then we're going to scale it up to all the gender desks that we are creating. I know I've been very, very quick. I'm going to pass on to Umar. I will stop sharing. Umar, if you can share what you did around water conservation.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, I can share the screen. Yes, I'll try to be brief and concise so that we'll stick to the timeline. I have colleagues, you can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So basically, last year we did this water conservation experiment on applying behavioral communication to change household consumption of water. We realized, in the context of Islamabad, we did this background analysis where we realized, water supply is decreasing rapidly in Islamabad. And overall, we are facing a shortage of 106 gallons per day. Now, there are various ways we thought water could be conserved. One was to hardly any recycling going on. There is no metering or pricing of water. There is excessive lossage because of during water supply system. Households and both commercial operators are using water very at a very rapid pace because of lack of water metering or pricing in that context. And then much of the reliance has been because as I said, there is a shortage of water being supplied by the CDA in terms of 106 gallons of water per day being shortage. There is a lot of over consumption of water through groundwater resources. So households, commercial operators have been doing water boring and using depleting groundwater resources. So our intervention was multiple fold, but just focusing on how we can work with the consumers in that case, and that I'm talking about the residents of Islamabad, to see how water could be conserved. Our biggest challenge in the whole of this experiment was that there was no metering to measure the impact of water usage. So to be honest, when we did this experiment, we wanted to have some sort of a background data to see how households have been consuming water, and once we do the intervention, we can measure the impact through metering. But unfortunately, we could not do this. We did this baselining of this. We did a survey to see how and where the households have been using water. What are the various sectors, where various avenues of water has been consumed more in larger quantity within the households. And then based on that, we did this behavioral insight and everything to see what sort of messages we can develop. But our underlying hypothesis in this case was to see, can low cost nudges induce water conservation in urban Pakistan? And for this experiment, we were focusing largely on Islamabad. In terms of how we did the test, we did a randomized assignment of 832 households to and divided them into treatment and control groups. We did a baseline survey, as I said, to see the existing level of water consumption, and to see where households have been using water. Then we designed some nudges And I'll go to the next slide to showcase, to reflect on what nudges we used, to see how, like, to focus on separate different themes so that we can check which sort of nudges would have an impact. And then we did, like, we did a end-line survey to see how the water consumption patterns changed during the course of this experiment. Again, the target, like, the message was to encourage more socially aware and responsible behavior of households so that they can conserve water, and to highlight the urgent need to conserve water. The first nudge that we developed was to basically a letter from the MCI asking our households to conserve water because of its, like, various segments. It's like, it's a social responsibility because, like, the water resources are depleting in Islamabad. So it's the responsibility of the citizen to conserve water, and municipality is taking ownership of this and trying to work out with city residents to see how water could be conserved. The second nudge was to develop different avenues. This was based on basically our baseline survey, where we, like, found out how people have not been using, how people are not being using water efficiently, and the avenues where they can conserve water. So we prepared this poster where we identified different ways, clearly identifying avenues where people can conserve water and how much water they can save by doing these minor small interventions. The third nudge was like, to appeal to the economic aspect, like in the monetary cost associated with, like, getting water. And this was the cost that we thought, like, average people are paying in Karachi to conserve, to get water. So we said, like, families in Islamabad are already paying up to 1.5 lakhs a year on water from tankers. But the underlying message was, like, they would have to pay more if they are not conserving water. And the fourth one was appealing to their religious association, like, our focus of our religion to conserve water. The way we conducted the experiment was we had a control group, which was, like, business as usual. Then we sent different treatments, like, treatment one in terms of letter and the poster, treatment two, letter, poster, and the financial cost, treatment three, letter, poster, and religious content. The findings were quite, like, to some extent surprising, but it gave us, like, some lessons. It was a pilot, so we wanted to derive some lessons out of it. So when these posters were sent, or these messages with nudges were sent, we realized that there was a reduction in water use when we talk about water use inside the boundary of the house. So I'm, like, within the four walls of the house. But external usage, like in terms of laundry, maybe, or in terms of washing your cars or planting and like, watering lawns, there was an increase in water consumption outside the house, and there was a reduction in water consumption inside the house. When I'm talking about inside the house, like, people have started reducing the shower times. Like, in the kitchen, the water has been, like, people would save water in the sink and rinse the like, utensils first. So there was a saving in water usage in kitchen. Similarly, like, people would be switching off their taps while not using water. There was like, there was a reduction in amount of water used for cooking, and also, like, in terms of water used for cleaning your floors. So, like, within the household, the water consumption reduced. Outside the walls of the house, the water consumption increased. Our recommendations in this case were, one, like, the whole experiment was hinging on the measurement of water. Of course, when, like, there are challenges when you ask stakeholders that, like, how much of your water have you conserved after you give a certain message. So there is some bias in there because you've already given the same message to the household, and then you go and ask them how much that impact would be. So of course, like, there would be some over reporting. So if we have a scientific way to measure how much water has been consumed, there would be evidence to see how much the project intervention created that impact. Then there was, what the critical finding was, the communication gap between staff and members of the households. So the messages were targeted to the household, like in the head of the household, or the female in the household, but not to the staff members. So they were absorbed by the like, by the residents of the house, but not by the staff members, and hence the extra usage in terms of cleaning your cars or washing your laundry, or even using more water for lawns. Again, like, the third key finding was in terms of, like, targeted message would have, like, you would have a targeted message for the head of the household. For him, the economic aspect might appeal more, For children, you need to have a different sort of message. You make your message more scientific, like, they might not have an impact, or like, if you're talking about economics to them, they might not have a impact. For them, it's more about like, social awareness, and hence we designed these comic books as a next step to this. And then like, you need to have a different message for the domestic help. Lastly, nudges might not be a powerful tool in this context, because like, again, this for the scarce resources, it is important that we price water. Of course, you need to do some behavioral insight, but as I was speaking to Omar Taj at the beginning of this presentation, like, this is an experiment. You can do a pilot, but like, behavioral changes do not occur in a very short span of time. They take like, ages to have an impact on different segments of the society. So what one lesson that we learned from this was to focus on children, keep providing them nudges in one way or the other. We did this like, follow up to this experiment. We did we prepared a booklet of like, where we displayed these water conservation messages to through a comic book to children. Now recently, we again, like, the same note, we were doing this water conservation behavioral insight experiment with in the hotels, and again we developed some comic books for the children. Especially for us, children are the ambassadors of change, and you like, create that behavioral impact on them. You do it for like, for a few for some time. This would be an agent of change for future, like, you'll have an impact, a longer term impact in the future. So these were some of the key recommendations that came out from the experiment, and an overall brief of what the experiment was. I'm like, available to answer any questions that you have. Over to Umar.
Great, thanks a lot. So if I can just open this out and Tabinder, shout out if there are questions.
Yes, thank
otherwise
you.
We would, yeah.
Thank you, Umar, Dr. Umar and Hamza. If there are any questions, please do ask. You can type in the chat as well, or unmute yourself and then ask the question.
Presentations were pretty clear.
All right. Yeah. All right. In that case, Beenish, if I can pass on to you.
Yes, perfect. So I think given that we're running short on time anyway, so we can always close. Thank you again to Umar, Hamza, and Dr. Umar for presenting. So for everybody here, I know that we had packed in quite a lot in one call, but it's always hard to get people together for a full-on presentation. What we do want to do is over the next 3 weeks, we are planning to host BI clinics with Dr. Umar Taj. So these will be 30-minute consultation sessions to identify whatever it is that you need. So this offer is, for Umar Malik also. If you wanted to, you had some questions earlier, we can schedule a 30-minute call or more with you and your team to discuss the next steps. Similarly, for everyone else, this invitation is open to you. Tabinda will be circulating the recording of the webinar, including reiterating this message of scheduling these consultations. We might even come back to you with a particular week that we open up this. So please go back to your projects and see in areas that you are working where you could use this approach or have more questions to discuss to boost impact. At UNDP right now, using innovative approaches is extremely key. We report against it in our ROAR. BI is one of those things. So I cannot emphasize enough for you to take a look and make sure we take these new approaches forward. And then we will also make sure and we're going to do this with other our areas, but we will also create a BI page on our SharePoint. Here we will put up all the related information, reading materials, projects, everything that you need to do. We will do this with our other tools like experimentation, etc. as well. So we're going to create an internal repository for this information. I think, what am I missing? Anything else? Yes. And then, you know, of course, if you want more, if you have any questions, want to schedule a meeting, whatever, just please write to myself, Tabinda, and Dr. Umar, or we can connect you to Dr. Umar Taj. We really want to build up this new service line, and we also want to build up on the work that our colleagues are doing and bring back these lessons. I see there's a comment here. I suggest we need to discuss in next session on how to address anchoring, cursive knowledge, etc., and how to tackle those. That, I think, Dr. Umar Taj, maybe closing, you can take the closing for this.
Yeah, of course. So I do understand. I in some way I do apologize. It's throwing a lot your end. The only thing is, I'm hoping that you at least got some sense of, so this is the offer of Behavioral Insights, and maybe some idea of something you are doing. It could be as simple as you might already be sending out or thinking about sending a text message to some target audience, and it could simply be just getting some feedback on, can I just change some wording in this text message to make it more effective? You might be thinking of designing a poster, and that might be sent across different schools in Pakistan, for example, or the gender desk stuff. Right? And it might simply be just sharing it with the AccLab and saying, any thoughts? And these are very, very quick things. So the whole purpose of today was to give you a flavor of what is Behavioral Insight. We will have these follow-up calls. Those BI clinics are specifically for the purpose that we will sit with you individually and say, so what are you doing? Any challenges that you are facing? Any way that we can help you? And that will be those one-to-one in which it will be specific for your project. So thanks a lot, all of you, for giving us this time. We are really hoping to try and build this community of practice around Behavioral Insights in our country office. We've already done a lot of good work. We've been doing this since 2015. It's just a matter of now identifying all of us who are doing this work, have it in one place, and then try and keep on thinking every time when a project comes up, can I use BI? Can I use more innovative thinking in this? So thanks a lot, all of you, for giving us this time, and hopefully see all of you in the BI clinics for those one-to-one sessions.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.